So, welcome back to Margot Bell Designs. Today we're doing gathers and frills. I've got some plain blue polycotton today that I'm going to be stitching in white so that you can see what I'm doing. Our general rule for gathers is to have at least 1/3 more gathers to the measurement that you're actually sewing it into. So I'm pretending this is like a bodice of a dress or something, and then I'm going to add in gathers onto it. So I have a 30cm measurement for my dress, and then I have a 42cm measurement that my gathers is going to go onto my dress. So I'm going to be sewing on my industrial machine today. You can use an industrial, you can use a domestic machine, it's just whatever you feel comfortable with, and I'll step you through the instructions on how to perfect gathers. So with our gathering, what we need first up is quite a long thread, so we have something to hold on to so we can pull our threads through. Then we need to change our stitch length. On my industrial machine, this stitch length here we need to go to as long as we can go, so we're going to change it to 4. If you're on a domestic machine, you've got your width and then your length down the bottom, so you need to change this right down to as long as it will go, down to 4, or yours might be computerized. Okay, going back to my industrial machine, if you have an automatic thread cutter at the start and at the finish, we're also going to turn them off so that it's not going to cut our threads and it's not going to do any back tack. Okay, we don't need to back tack when we're just establishing our gathering stitch. So starting on our longer piece of fabric, we're going to come in, depends on your seam allowance that you have on your pattern, but I normally try and work to around 1 centimetre seam allowance on most of my garments, sometimes 1.5. So if we come in, say 5 mils from our raw edge, there's no need to overlock it just yet to neaten it. We can do that once we've put it into our garment or joined our seam. So we're just going to start probably about 1 centimetre in, because we know we've got seam allowance on there that's going to go into the seam. So centimetre in, and then about 1/2 centimetre in from the side edge, and we're just going to start stitching. Hold on to your threads, start stitching, and it's a really long stitch. You'll see it start to gather up. Don't panic if it does start to gather up. Then you need to stop about 1 centimetre from the end, pull your needle up, and then we're going to pull it out so that we've got a nice big long tail of at least 10 centimetres, and then trim it off. Okay, so you can see you've got a nice big long tail of 2 ends, right? I'm doing it in white so you can actually see it on the blue. Then we're going to go back and do another row. So we've got 2 rows, and we just want the next row, say 2 or 3 mils to the side of that, with a tail as well. Okay, it's quite close. Don't overlap the stitching though, very important. Don't worry if it's a little bit gathered. Then the same again, make sure you've got a lovely long tail. So that you can work with it. Right, so we've got our 2 rows of stitching. Okay, then if you can pin one end, or you can knot one end, and then you're going to work from one end to the other. Okay, so as I said, the rule of thumb with gathers is at least 1/3 extra. You can go up to double the gathers. Depends on your fabric thickness and the type of fabric that you have, and how you want the gathers to look. Alright, so once you've got the gathers coming into the same measurement as your body, okay, then you just need to get those gathers nice and even. See here how this bit's flat and this bit's really gathered, so I need to use my fingernails just to flick this along so that those gathers sit nice and evenly. Okay, if you've got a fabric that's going to fray heaps, it's not a good idea to do gathers on it, like a linen or something like that. So we'll just smooth it all out so it's sitting evenly. You don't want all the gathers to one end or right in the middle of anything. Put it all out a bit. Right, so what we want to do here is go back and adjust our stitch length back to a normal length of 2.2. And then we put our right sides together. Hold all those threads out. You can put your back tack function back on. You can stitch it from this side and make sure you've got a nice big seam allowance, or you can stitch it from underneath. I like to have my flat fabric on top so I can see that it is sitting nice and flat and it's not puckering up, okay? Just have a look at your gathers underneath, and you know you've got to work to that 1 centimetre seam allowance, otherwise you're going to have some of the stitching hanging out. So we're back tack now on our top layer that's going onto our body. Stitch all the way along, nice 1 centimetre seam. You can smooth it out. Use your fingers to keep that even as you go. You can smooth out those gathers a little bit. Then you can see we have a nice gathered skirt or a gathered dress on the top of a bodice, okay? Then you may like to press it flat. You can roll it over the edge of your machine like this, which kind of smooths out the edge. You may go and overlock and neaten that inside, and then you may like to top stitch. If you're going to top stitch, you always top stitch it on the less bulky side, okay? So you're catching all that stitching into the body side, not on the gathered side. You're not going to put all that thickness onto your gathered side, okay? Your seams always go to the body, the flat side. And then you might do a row of top stitching along the edge just to hold those gathers in place. Then we're on to frills. So we need to fine double neaten each side of our frills so that it's ready to go and put our gathering stitch on. So we go and change our length, and we take off our back tacking, and we grab our ties, and we're just going to come in the same 5 mils from here, so our stitching will be probably along here somewhere. And we'll come in like a centimetre from the edge. So with this gathering stitch on the frills, I'm actually holding it so it's not able to gather itself in as it's being stitched. So we've got our 2 rows, and then we can hold the underneath threads away, and these top 2 threads, we can just gently pull this along, and it gathers with your thumb, underneath your thumb, all along the piece, until you've got the right size. We're going to stitch it back onto the other side of our sample here. Just use your fingers. Just be careful at the end that you don't pull it off, otherwise all those gathers will undo. It's going to need to pin the end of your threads. It can take you ages, or it can take you a little while. You could fold it in half and pop a little chalk mark here to know that that goes halfway through your piece that you're stitching it onto. Fold your piece that you're stitching it onto, put a little notch in it. And know that your halfway point has to go to there. See how even your gathers are. I need to ease it up a bit. Now we're going to stitch our frill onto our underneath layer. This might be a pair of bloomers or a hem of a skirt or a dress or a pants. So we just need to work out where that's going to sit. You don't need to, I've just overlocked it so that your overlocking is showing to the inside. That's neat. We need to take our stitch length back to 2.5, which is our normal stitch length. You don't want to keep it on the gathering stitch or it's all going to pull in. You can turn back on your back tacking function, and we're going to aim to stitch in the middle of these 2 rows, okay? So you need to work out exactly where that's going to be. It's going to be roughly 1 centimetre from the edge of our overlocking that we're going to come in, okay? Back tack to hold it in place. If you concentrate on getting that stitching in the middle of that gathering, it's easier to unpick it. And then we can go and unpick those 2 layers of stitching. Just pull them out. Pulls out quite easily because it's such a loose stitch. And then this is where contrast thread is much easier to use for your gathers, so you can see it when you're unpicking it. So our second frill is double the measurement of our first frill to show the effect that doubling has. We're going to be stitching from the top down. You need to work the gathering back towards that way. So we start pulling the tails from this end on the top layer, so that they're going back towards the start of the stitching. Then as you're going along stitching, you can always extend it or pull it tighter towards the end. Just get it under the thumb and ease it in a bit. Change your gather stitch back to straight and normal length. So having double the amount of gathering, it's a lot bulkier and it's a lot more easing those stitches into that gathering space. Okay, so that's one thing to remember when you're actually designing how much frills and how much gathers to have. Twice as much gather on the second row. Then we unpick it. Unpick the 2 rows of gathering stitch. So here you can see our finished product of up the top. You've got the gathering stitched into the seam, and then you've got your 2 rows of frills. The second row being double as much gathering as the first row. So now that you're a designer, you can work out exactly how much gathers you need to put into your project that you're working on. Look out for our next video on scrunchies, the pièce de résistance on gathers.